Here's every bizarre location in the US. Places where people vanish with no reason. Ancient sites and symbols, still a mystery for everyone. From a knob where draft dodgers disappeared into the rocks in 1917, to a knob where 3 masked men were hanged on the square below, and the old families still won't cross it after dark. To a knob they mined until the mountain itself was gone, and black water rose in the empty shaft beneath. These are the bald knobs of the Ozarks, bare stone crowns where the trees quit and the rock goes still. 8 of them, and on every one the locals keep back from the same place. Number 8. Turner Ward Knob and Cecil Cove, Newton County, Arkansas. Turner Ward Knob is the highest named peak in the entire Ozarks, about 2,463 feet. And that word, named, is the first strange thing about it, because there are 5 more peaks within sight of it that stand even higher, and not one of them has a name at all. The tallest ground in the whole Ozark range, and the map makers just stopped, left it blank. Whatever's up on those summits, it was never worth labeling to the people who lived under it. But the knob isn't really the story here. The story is the valley, a few miles off its shoulder, a place called Cecil Cove. Cecil Cove is real. You can find it on a map. It runs about 9 miles long and 3 miles wide, with what one old account called unusually steep mountains on both sides. And for more than 100 years, it has done exactly one thing better than anywhere else in these hills. It makes people disappear who want to disappear. In 1917, when the First World War draft came down, a handful of young men in northern Newton County simply refused to go. They were called slackers, and they vanished into Cecil Cove. This wasn't new ground for that kind of thing 50 years earlier, during the Civil War. The same nearly impossible country had hidden men who were neither Union nor Confederate, men who just wanted the war to pass them by. When the law came for the draft resistors, the land beat the law. The federal government sent an army colonel, a team of special investigators, and 4 U.S. Marshals. After looking the country over, the U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas said flat out that it would take a regiment of soldiers months to comb it, and that the terrain was so rough he doubted they could even do it on horseback. They searched. They found nothing. They went home empty-handed. There's one line from a reporter who walked into the cove during all this that I can't shake. He called it a region of endless hiding places, studded with boulders and pocketed with caves. A place where a searcher might pass within arm's reach of a man and never know he was there. So the prohibition here isn't a fence or a sign or a law. It's the ground itself. People walked into this valley to not be found, and the land simply closed over them. And the old camps up along the Buffalo River carry their own quieter story. They'll tell you about Smokey Joe, a scoutmaster who's said to have lost his mind somewhere up in these hills. Nobody can ever quite tell you when. Cecil Cove hides people on purpose. It takes them in and shuts the door, which is the exact opposite of where we're going next, because the next knob was chosen for one reason only, so that no one could ever hide on it at all. Number 7. Knoblick Mountain, St. Francois County, Missouri. Knoblick Mountain got its name from salt. There are natural salt springs, licks at the base of it, and for thousands of years the deer and the game came down to them, and the people followed the game, and the name stuck. The mountain itself is older than almost anything around it. Bare granite, the worn-down root of a volcano that was already ancient when the dinosaurs showed up. But that's not what makes people uneasy up there. What makes people uneasy is what's standing on the crown, There's a fire lookout tower on top of Noblik Mountain. Or there was. It's abandoned now. For decades, a person sat up in that tower through the dry months watching the horizon for smoke. Then the satellites came and the infrared cameras. And one day, nobody needed a human being on that summit anymore. So they left the tower where it stood. It's still up there, rusting on the bald granite. A little glass box that used to be full of someone watching, now full of nothing. And the ground around it is genuinely ODD. The summit is what's called a granite glade, a bare, rocky, almost desert-like opening where the trees just give up and the stone shows through. 40 acres of boulders, sinkholes, spring-fed pits in the rock. At the foot of the mountain, there was once a whole town built around the granite quarries, and that's mostly gone too now. A vanished little place, with a hollow nearby that somebody, a long time ago, decided to call Possum Hollow. Hikers who've been up on that glade will tell you it plays tricks on you, that you start back down off the bare rock, sure you know the way, and you come out facing the wrong direction entirely. They say it the way people say things they don't quite want to commit to. Losing your bearings up there is one thing. It's a story you laugh about later. The next knob on this list is for the people who went looking and never found their way back at all. Number 6. Iron Mountain, St. Francois County, Missouri. Iron Mountain, Missouri was founded in 1836, and it was named for the mountain it sat on, a mountain people genuinely believed at the time was made almost entirely of solid iron ore. They thought they'd found a hill of metal, so they did the obvious thing. They started mining it. Not a vein inside the mountain itself. Year after year, they cut the namesake peak down and shipped it north on the railroad, until the thing the whole town was named after had been carried away piece by piece. The town outlived the mountain. Barely. The mine wound down, the ore stopped paying, and Iron Mountain slid into that slow, quiet death that mining towns die. The post office opened in 1846 and somehow hung on until 1978 before it finally went dark. More than a century of a town fading around the empty place where its mountain used to be. But here's the part of this corner of Missouri that actually crawls under your skin. A few miles away, in the same county, sat the Bonne Terre mine, once one of the largest lead mines in the entire world. When it closed in the 1960s, they stopped running the pumps, and the water came up. It filled the tunnels level after level until the whole enormous mine was a vast underground lake, black, still, and silent. The mining equipment is still down there. The carts, the tools, the drills, all of it sitting on the bottom in the dark exactly where the last man set it down. 50 feet under the surface of water that never moves and never sees the sun. That's the truth of the high country here. The mountains are hollow, and the hollows filled with black water. This mountain got worked to death. The next knob did the killing itself. Number 5. Snaps Bald, near Kirbyville, Taney County, Missouri. This is where the masks began. On April 5, 1885, around 200 men climbed a treeless hilltop north of Kirbyville called Snaps Bald, and they elected a leader, and they became something that the Ozark still hasn't fully shaken off. They called themselves a Law and Order League. History remembers them as the Bald Knobbers, and they took that name from this exact kind of place, the Bald Knob, the grassy hilltop with no trees on it, because they chose to meet up there specifically so that no one could ever creep up and listen. On a bald, you see every direction at once. On a bald, there are no spies. That is the literal documented answer to the question this whole video keeps circling. That's why the edge, That's why the open crown. They needed to see who was coming. You've probably seen the masks even if you've never heard the name. Black hoods with horns and white faces painted on the front. Though in the early days, some of them just wore flour sacks with the eyes cut out and the corners tied up into little points like ears. Down in Branson today, there's a stage show that still puts those hoods on for the tourists. People clap. 140 years ago, they did not clap. It took the bald knobbers 10 days to spill blood. On April 15th, 1885, about 100 of them broke open the door of the county jail in Forsyth, dragged out 2 brothers, Frank and Tubal Taylor, hauled them outside of town, and hanged them from an oak tree. That was the first. It was not close to the last. Locals will tell you that you don't linger on the old bald after dark, that the hill remembers what it was built to watch for. They'll tell you that part softly. These men climbed the bald so they would be seen, so they would hold the high ground and miss nothing. The next men on this list died on a knob, doing the exact opposite, trying, in the dark, not to be seen at all. Number 4, Oak Grove and Kirbyville, Taney County, Missouri. This is the strangest true thing on this entire list, because the murder weapon here was a song. There was a young man named Andrew Cogburn, 19 years old, an orphan, and absolutely fearless about the most dangerous man in the county. The leader of the Bald Knobbers was a giant named Nat Kinney, and Cogburn made a full-time hobby out of humiliating him. He called Kinney the Old Blue Gobbler. He would gobble like a turkey when Kinney walked past. He wrote a mocking little tune he called The Ballad of the Bald Knobbers and sang it all over the county. And at one point, he nailed a tiny coffin to the door of the Oak Grove schoolhouse, where Kinney preached, just so the message would be clear. On the night of February 28, 1886, outside that same Oak Grove schoolhouse after Sunday service, Nat Kinney shot Andrew Cogburn dead. It was ruled self-defense the very next day. There was exactly one witness who was not a bald knobber, a man named Sam Snap, and Snap said Cogburn never even had a gun out. So now, hold on to what happens to the witness. A few months later, in May of 1886, a bald knobber named Wash Middleton ran into Sam Snap on a store porch in Kirbyville. And Snap was humming. He was humming Cogburn's song, that same little ballad. Middleton told him to stop. Snap kept humming. Middleton shot him 3 times and left him to die in the road, an unarmed man killed over a tune. One of the men involved said it plainly years later. The singing of that song caused Snap's death, a folk song, twice. That's not a legend I'm softening for you, that's in the court record. And there's one more thing this stretch of Taney County lost in those years, in a single night. On December 19th, 1885, the county courthouse in Forsyth burned to the ground. Almost every record inside burned with it, including the land deeds. Every paper that said who owned what, who was related to whom, who had a claim on which patch of these hills, gone, in a few hours, in the dark. Each side blamed the other. Nobody was ever charged. An entire county's memory of itself turned to ash overnight and never explained. In Taney County, the law mostly looked away from all of this. In the county right next door, the law finally looked back, and it came with a rope. Number 3. Pilot Knob, Iron County, Missouri. Pilot Knob is a real mountain, a hard granite knob rising more than 1,500 feet over the Arcadia Valley. And at the foot of it, the Army built a fort because that little gap in the hills was the end of the line for the Iron Mountain Railroad, and they could not afford to lose it. They called it Fort Davidson. A 6-sided earthwork with a dry moat around it and an open killing field in front. And on the afternoon of September 27, 1864, That open field earned its name. A Confederate general named Sterling Price came up that valley with something like 12,000 men. Inside the fort were roughly 1,450 Union defenders. Price decided to take the place by simply throwing his army straight at the walls, across open ground in daylight. It lasted about 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, somewhere close to 1,000 of Price's men fell, killed or wounded in the dirt in front of the fort, cut down in the open the moment they came into range. 20 minutes. And then, the night did something the day hadn't. The Union troops inside knew they couldn't survive a second day, so in the black early morning hours, they walked their whole garrison straight out of the fort and right through the Confederate lines. And in the dark and the chaos, the Confederate pickets mistook them for their own men and let them pass. Before the last of them left, they lit a slow fuse to the powder magazine. Sometime after they'd gone, it blew. The blast shook the ground for miles and threw debris half a mile through the dark. General Price didn't even send anyone to look until daybreak, and when his men finally walked into the fort, they found it empty, with a smoking crater where the magazine had been. Here's why this one stays with you. It's all still there. The earthen walls still stand. The crater the explosion tore is still at the center of them. You can walk down into the hole. And the dead from that 20-minute slaughter were buried right there in the fort's own rifle trench. A long pit dug for fighting that became a mass grave instead. There's a granite monument over it now. The men are still under the ground you're standing on. At Pilot Knob, the dead are counted. They're named. There's a stone. On the next knob, the dead were made deliberately, slowly, in front of a crowd, on a scaffold. Number 2. The Ozark Square and the Christian County Balds. Missouri, when the Bald Knobbers spread into Christian County, they got worse. The chapter there, led by a man named Dave Walker, became the most feared of all of them, less interested in horse thieves than in morality, ruling over the railroad boomtown of Chadwick with its saloons and its brothels and its money. On the night of March 11th, 1887, about 25 of them, in their hoods, met at a cave to argue about whether to disband. Instead of disbanding, they rode to a cabin. I want to be careful here, because this part is fully documented, and it is genuinely hard. Inside that one-room cabin were the Edens and Green families. William Edens, who had spoken out against the Bald Knobbers, and his sick wife Emma. His parents, his sister Melvina, who was down with the measles, her husband Charles Green, and the 2 Green children, one of them 3 years old, the other 3 months. The masked men splintered the oak door with a railroad tie and fired shotguns blind into the dark of that little room. William Edens and Charles Green were killed almost instantly. Another man took an axe blow to the head. In the middle of it, Melvina got her hands on one of the attackers and tore the mask clean off his face, and recognized him. That single act, a sick woman pulling a hood off in the chaos, is what finally broke the Bald Knobbers, because now there was a name. What followed was one of the biggest trials the region had ever seen. Around 80 men were indicted. Reporters came from around the world and stayed for a year and a half. In the end, 4 were sentenced to hang. The hanging happened on the square in the town of Ozark on May 10, 1889, and it went wrong. The ropes were too long. When the trap dropped, it didn't do what it was supposed to do. It took 34 minutes for one of the condemned men, Billy Walker, to die in front of everyone. 34 minutes. There's a historical marker standing on that square today. People walk past it to get lunch. The masks finally answered to a court. But standing here at the end, the oldest question on this list still isn't who swung, or who got shot, or who vanished into the cove. It's the thing that was true at every single one of these places. Why is it always the bald? Why always the rim? Number 1. The bald rim itself. Here's the answer. And it was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Every chapter of this, the founding on Snap's bald, the masks, the killings, the men who watched the valley for spies, all of it happened on or because of the bald, the treeless crown, and the bald knobbers understood that crown better than anyone before or since, because they understood both halves of it at once. Stand on the bald and you command everything. You see every soul climbing toward you. You miss nothing. But step wrong on the bald, and there is nowhere on God's earth to hide. The same bare ground that lets you watch the world lets the world watch you. It gives you everything, and it offers you no cover at all. That is why they needed it. And that, in the end, is what makes the rim feel the way it feels. These weren't ghosts. This is the part people get wrong. The bald knobbers were real men, and over their few short years, they killed somewhere between 15 and 18 people that we know of. Their hoods are a stage show in Branson now, and yet, go to Taney County today and talk to the people whose families go back. They'll tell you they grew up afraid of the bald knobbers, not the history of them. A child in those hills a few years ago was scared of masked men who last rode 140 years before that kid was born. The fear outlived the men by almost a century and a half. It got into the ground and it stayed. So that's why no one walks the bald rim alone at dusk. Not because of a monster, because of memory. The old-timers will tell you softly, the way they tell you everything that matters, that if you stand up on the open crown as the light goes, you can feel it. The sense of being watched from every direction at once. The exact thing the marked men felt in the last moments before the hoods came up the slope. Black-horned hoods on a treeless hilltop. Nothing growing, so nothing can hide. You see everyone coming, and everyone sees you. That's where this started. And if you ever find yourself up on one of these bald Ozark crowns, with the trees stopped below you and the whole sky open above, that's the spot. That's the rim. That's why no one dares go near the edge. That was the bald rim, the thread that ran through every one of these places, all the way back to the first hood on the first hilltop. If you're asking which one gets me, it's not the crater and it's not the hanging, it's the song. The idea that a man could be shot dead in a road for humming a tune, and then the only witness shot dead for humming the same one. That a little ballad could be a murder weapon twice. I don't think I'll ever quite get that out of my head. And every place I've shown you tonight is real. You can stand in Pilot Knob's crater. You can read the marker on the Ozark Square. You can drive to Snap's Bald, hike towards Cecil Cove, climb up to the Dead Tower on Knob Lick. None of this is invented. That's the part that should keep you up. Number 18. The Ringing Rocks, Montana. In the hills of western Montana, there's a field of boulders that should not make a sound, and does. Strike the right stone with a hammer, and it rings. A clean, bell-like tone, like struck metal ringing out across the field. Strike the boulder sitting inches away from it, and you get nothing. A dead thud. Same stone, same field, same age, and one sings, and one is silent. Geologists have tested it, and the strangeness is real. The rocks that ring and the rocks that don't are made of the same material. The difference seems to live in how they're packed together and the stress locked up inside them. And here's the part that unsettles people. Take a ringing rock out of the field, and the ring fades. The tone belongs to the place, not the stone. Carry it away, and it goes quiet in your hands. They can tell you that much. What they can't fully tell you is why it happens in this one rare field and almost nowhere else on the planet. People have come to these rocks for a very long time, striking them, listening. And you have to wonder what the first ones thought they were hearing. A field of stone that answers when you knock, in a voice that sounds almost like it's trying to say something, and falls silent the moment you try to take it home. Number 17. Russell Cave, Alabama. Under a hillside in northern Alabama, there's a cave mouth where human beings sheltered, without a single break, for more than 10,000 years. The same hole in the ground, 100 straight centuries of people. That number isn't a guess. Archaeologists dug down through the cave floor, one layer at a time, and every layer held the tools, the bones, the cold ashes of a different age, stacked on top of each other like the pages of a book. The bottom page is older than farming, older than the wheel, older than almost anything you picture when you hear the word ancient. Sit with what that takes. Hundreds of generations, not one of whom could read or write, all somehow knowing this one place was safe. Passing that knowledge down mouth to mouth across a stretch of time so long, the mind slides right off it. They never wrote down why this cave and not the next one. They just kept coming back for 10,000 years. And then, at some point, they stopped. Nobody can tell you what they knew about this place that we don't, or what finally drove them out of a shelter that had kept their people alive since before history began. Number 16. Moaning Cavern, California. In the gold country of California, there's a vertical cave, a natural shaft that drops straight down into the dark, deep enough to swallow a building whole. And when the first explorers were lowered to the bottom, they found human bones. A lot of them. Some of the oldest human remains ever discovered in the American West came up out of a pit like this one. People who went into the earth thousands of years ago and never came back out. That part is documented. Real bones, real depth, real age. What the experts genuinely argue about is how they got down there. Did they fall, one after another across thousands of years, into a hole they never saw opening beneath them? Or were they lowered in on purpose, placed in the dark, for reasons no one will ever read to us? The cave takes its name from a sound it makes when air moves through the opening, a low moan that rises up out of the ground. The old miners said it sounded like voices. And that's the thing you can't shake about a hole in the earth that collected the dead for thousands of years, that it doesn't sit there silent. It moans. Number 15. Kazumura Cave, Hawaii. Beneath the slopes of an active volcano on the big island of Hawaii runs the longest, deepest lava tube on Earth, a frozen river of stone, more than 40 miles of it, plunging thousands of feet down toward the sea. It formed maybe 500 years ago, when molten rock drained out from under a hardening crust and left a hollow vein running through the island. The walls still glitter. The ceiling still holds drips of lava frozen the instant they fell, hanging down like stone teeth. You can go into it, but it takes 2 full days in the dark to pass through, crawling and climbing the whole way down. Native Hawaiian tradition holds that these tubes are the work of Pele, the volcano goddess, and that some of the hidden chambers were used as sacred burial places, the dead given back to the fire that made the land. It's said that certain passages were never meant for the living to enter at all, and that's the question that walks beside you the whole way down into the glittering dark. If your people built a tomb inside a living volcano, what were you trying to keep in? Or what were you trying to keep the rest of us out of? Number 14. The Lost Sea, Tennessee. Far below the hills of East Tennessee sits the largest underground lake in the country, a body of black water in total darkness, and its full size still hasn't been completely mapped. Divers keep going. They keep not finding the end of it. But the water isn't the strangest thing down there. Deep inside the cave, far past where the lake ends, explorers found the tracks and the bones of a jaguar, an Ice Age predator that walked into this cave tens of thousands of years ago and never walked back out. Its prints are still pressed into the cave floor, exactly where it last set them down. How does an Ice Age jaguar end up that deep underground, in the pitch black, that far from any opening we can find? Was it chasing something in, hiding from something outside? Did it lose its way in the dark and simply never find the light again? The animal left its final footsteps in a place no animal should have been able to reach. And if it could get that far in, there's the question you don't want to ask. What else went that deep and never came back up? Number 13. Blanchard Springs Caverns, Arkansas. Under the Ozark Hills of Arkansas, there's a cave geologists describe with a word that should stop you cold: living. It is still being made right now, tonight, while you watch this. An underground river runs through its lowest level, cutting the rock deeper every single day. The same slow work it's been doing for millions of years and will still be doing long after everyone watching this is gone. There are chambers down there big enough to hold 3 football fields end to end and a wall of flowstone over 150 feet tall that pours down the rock like a frozen waterfall caught mid-fall. And this cave wasn't even found until modern times. The Ozark people have always had stories about these hollows and the caves that open out of them, places the old-timers tell you to leave be, where the ground has a habit of swallowing things and not giving them back. And that's the part that gets me about all of this karst country. If something this enormous stayed hidden under Arkansas until almost living memory, what's still down there in the dark that nobody has found yet? The hills are full of holes. Nobody has mapped them all. Nobody is close. Number 12. The Shoshone Ice Cave, Idaho. Beneath the southern Idaho desert, where the summer climbs past 100 degrees and the ground cracks open from the heat, there's a lava tube that holds a sheet of ice that never melts. Not in July. Not ever. The science is real. The tube is shaped and sealed so that cold winter air sinks down into it and gets trapped, and the volcanic rock holds the cold in like a thermos. A glacier, underground in the middle of a desert. The Shoshone and Bannock peoples knew about it for centuries and used it to keep meat from spoiling through the hottest part of the year. But stand with how wrong it feels. You're in a furnace, on burning desert ground, and a few feet beneath your boots is a world that is permanently frozen. A piece of the last ice age that simply refused to end, hiding under a landscape that says it has no business existing. How long has that ice been down there? What's locked inside it that nobody has thought to look at? And what else is this desert hiding just under the surface in all the places we never think to dig? Number 11. The Cliff Dwellings, Arizona and Utah. Across the canyons of the Four Corners, tucked into cliff faces and cave mouths hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, there are entire stone villages, rooms, towers, storehouses, round ceremonial chambers dug straight down into the earth. The ancestral Puebloans built them, and that part is certain. They farmed the high mesa tops and lived in these hidden, half-buried towns for centuries. And then, around 700 years ago, across the entire region, they left, all of them. The villages emptied out in the span of a generation. Why is one of the great unsolved questions in American archaeology drought, war, something none of us can name, and every theory springs a leak. But here's the detail that gets under the skin. In a lot of these places, they didn't just walk away. They sealed the doorways behind them, walled the rooms up from the outside, and you don't seal a door behind you if you ever plan to come back through it. So what were they closing in? What were they so certain had to stay sealed underground that they bricked it shut and abandoned the only home they had? Number 10. The Mandan Earth Lodges, North Dakota. Along the Missouri River in North Dakota, the Mandan built towns of earth lodges, big round homes dug down into the ground and roofed over with timber and packed soil, so a whole village sat half sunk in the prairie with smoke rising up out of holes in the earth. These weren't rough pits. They were engineered, warm through brutal winters, cool in the summer heat, laid out in real towns that were thriving long before any Europeans set foot on the river. This is about as close as America comes to a true underground settlement, and it was full of life. And then, in a single generation, it was gone. Smallpox came up the river and emptied the towns. In places, 9 out of every 10 people dead in a season. The lodges stood there with no one inside them. Picture it. A town built into the earth, engineered to outlast lifetimes, gone silent, the fires cold, the smoke holes dark, the heavy roofs slowly sagging in over rooms where a whole people used to live and sleep. The ground still holds the shape of them. We almost forgot they were ever there at all, and you have to wonder how many more of these silent, half-buried towns are still out under the grass that nobody has even gone looking for. Number 9. The Burial Caves. Of the Karst Belt, Missouri and Kentucky. Through the cave country where Missouri runs into Kentucky, there are caves where ancient people carried their dead deep inside, past the daylight, past the easy passages, into the black interior, and left them there. Archaeologists have documented it all across the region. Human remains, thousands of years old, placed far back in caves, in chambers that take real effort and real nerve to reach even today, with good light and good rope. This was not where these people lived. This was somewhere else, somewhere they chose deliberately for this one purpose. And it's the same question that opened this whole video, wearing a different face. Why so deep? Why carry your dead past every safe, lit, sensible spot and down into the part of the earth the body is built to run from? What did they believe happened to a person left in the true dark? And what did they believe was down there, waiting to receive them? They went far out of their way to put the dead beyond the reach of any light. The old people in that country still say there are caves you don't go into after dark. Maybe that's not superstition. Maybe that's a memory. Number 8. The Newark Earthworks, Ohio. In central Ohio, there are walls made of earth, giant geometric shapes raised out of the ground 2,000 years ago. A perfect circle big enough to set a skyscraper inside on its side. An octagon big enough to hold 4 Roman Colosseums. We know who built them. The Hopewell. That's not the mystery. The mystery is that the octagon is aligned precisely to the movements of the moon. Not the sun, which is the easy one. The moon, which runs on a cycle that takes more than 18 years to come all the way around and is genuinely hard to track. Somehow, a people with no writing, no metal tools, and no cities measured that cycle and built it into the dirt. Accurate to a degree you can still go out and check today. How? How do you measure an 18-year cycle in the sky with no written records to carry the numbers across the years and then lock it perfectly into walls of piled earth? And here's the deeper one. Why pour that much genius into the ground, into a shape so vast you can only really see it from above? from a sky they had no way to fly into. Who was it built to be seen by? They raised a machine for reading the heavens out of nothing but soil, and then their whole culture faded out of the record and left it lying there, still pointed at the moon. Number 7. The Serpent Mound, Ohio. On a ridge in southern Ohio, a quarter-mile-long serpent of raised earth uncoils across the ground, a giant snake, jaws stretched open, swallowing what looks like an egg. From where you stand, it's just a low green rise. From above, there's no mistaking what it is. It's the largest serpent effigy in the world. It's real, and you can walk the length of it today. But here's the fight the experts are still having. How old is it? For a long time, the answer seemed settled. Then newer dating shoved the number around. Some samples point to 2,000 years, some point much older, and nobody has fully agreed since. The serpent's age won't sit still, and every time it moves, it drags the whole story with it. The alignments only pull you in deeper. The coils appear to line up with the sun on the longest and shortest days of the year. So you've got a giant snake raised by hand, aimed at the solstices, sitting on a ridge that itself lies on the scar of an ancient meteor strike. And we cannot say for certain when it was made, or really why. What does it mean that the one shape they chose to build this big, this carefully, this permanently, was a serpent swallowing the sky? What were they trying to say, and who were they trying to say it to? Number 6. Cahokia, Illinois. Across the river from where St. Louis stands today, there was once a city of tens of thousands of people. At its height, it was larger than London was in the very same year. Pyramids built of earth, wide open plazas, a ring of giant timber posts set in the ground to track the sun like a calendar. This is documented, world-recognized fact. The Mississippians raised it 1,000 years ago, and it was the largest city anywhere north of Mexico. And inside one of those mounds, archaeologists opened mass graves, dozens of bodies, some of them buried in ways that strongly suggest they did not go into the ground willingly. And then the city died. Over a couple of centuries, tens of thousands of people drained away from it, and the greatest city in ancient North America emptied out and was left to the grass and the wind. Nobody can fully say why. Drought, flood, war, something that cracked it apart from the inside. Every answer is still argued over. Stand on the Great Mound and put the question to it. How do you forget a city of 40,000 people? How does a place that big, that organized, that powerful, simply stop and leave so little behind that for centuries afterward, people looked at the mounds and assumed they were just hills? Whatever happened here, the survivors never wrote it down. Maybe they never spoke of it again. Number 5. The Stone Chambers, New Hampshire and Vermont. Scattered through the hills of New England are hundreds of stone chambers, rooms built of massive stone slabs, stacked without a drop of mortar, roofed with capstones that weigh tons, and buried under earth until they vanish into the side of a hill. And this is the one that splits the experts straight down the middle, honestly, out in the open, to this day. Here's the honest part, because it matters more than the mystery. Most archaeologists, including the state archaeologists who've studied these the hardest, conclude that the great majority are colonial root cellars, practical storage built by farmers a few hundred years ago. That's the mainstream answer, and for most of the chambers, it's almost certainly the right one. But they admit, openly, that the case isn't closed on all of them. A handful are aligned to the solstice sun. A few don't fit the root cellar story at all. Put vegetables in some of them, and they rot, which is the one thing a root cellar is built not to do. The debate is genuine. It's still unsettled at the edges, and the people arguing the strange side aren't cranks. They're researchers who cannot make a few of these chambers fit the easy explanation. So which is it? Who stacked tons of stone into a hillside, buried it, and aimed the doorway at the turning of the year? And why does the most ordinary explanation keep failing on the strangest view? Nobody has settled it. That's not me reaching for mystery. That is the actual state of the question right now. Number 4. The Winnemucca Lake Carvings, Nevada. On the dried-up bed of a lake in the Nevada desert, cut into the rock, there are deep grooves and circles and winding patterns. And when scientists finally managed to date them, the number came back so old they had to sit down with it. Up to nearly 15,000 years old, among the oldest rock art ever found anywhere in North America. They dated it by the mineral crust that formed over the carvings the last time the lake's water covered them. That's hard science, not a guess. And the number is older than the people we were taught were the first to ever stand here. So who carved them? The textbook timeline says almost nobody should have been on that shore that long ago, with the skill and the will to cut deep, deliberate patterns into solid stone. Either the timeline we've been handed is wrong, or there was someone here. Before the cultures we can name, before the whole story we tell about who came first, doing something we have no record of and no name for. What were the carvings for? What did those circles mean to a hand that was moving before history had even started? The lake is gone now. The carvings aren't. And every year the experts go back and look again. The age only ever moves one direction, older. Number 3, Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. Under Kentucky lies the longest cave system on the planet, more than 400 miles of it mapped. And geologists are certain hundreds of miles more are still out there in the black, unwalked, unseen, unnamed. People have been going into it for 5,000 years. Deep inside, explorers have found the remains of ancient miners, and in at least one case, the preserved body of a person from thousands of years ago, pinned and crushed by a shifting rock while doing something miles inside the cave, in absolute darkness. They came in here by torchlight and went deep. We can prove that much. What we cannot tell you is what was worth the risk of going that far into a place that could kill you with a single fall, miles from the nearest mouth of light. And the cave still hasn't shown anyone its end. 400 miles in, and the passages just keep going. Sit with that as a plain physical fact. There is a hole in the ground in Kentucky, and not one living human being knows how big it is, because not one has ever reached the far end of it. What's down there in the hundreds of unmapped miles? Who else went in 5,000 years ago and is still down there somewhere we haven't walked yet? The cave keeps its own count of the people it's taken. It has never once told us the number. Number 2, Lechugilla Cave, New Mexico. Under the New Mexico desert lies a cave that no human being ever set foot in until 1986, sealed for millions of years. A world that finished forming and then simply waited in absolute darkness, since long before there were any people on Earth to come find it. And it didn't form the ordinary way. Most caves are carved from above, by water working its way down. This one was eaten out from below, by acid rising up, which is rare, and which left behind things the surface world has nothing to set beside them. Gypsum crystals taller than a person, formations that look grown rather than deposited, and life, bacteria that have never seen the sun, that live with no light and nothing falling in from above, by eating the rock itself. They evolved down there, sealed away from everything for millions of years, into something the surface has never seen. Almost no human will ever be allowed inside. It's protected, restricted to a tiny handful of scientists. because it is that fragile and that important. So sit with what that means. There is a sealed world beneath the desert, full of life that built itself in total darkness, running on its own rules, that we are only beginning to understand, and that we are mostly forbidden to enter. What else is alive down there that we haven't put a name to? And if life can do this, build an entire living world in the sealed dark, eating stone, needing nothing at all from the surface, then what is really down there, under all of it, in the caves we haven't broken into yet? We thought we knew what the dark was for. It turns out we didn't. Number 1. The cave art in the dark, Kentucky and Tennessee. Along the line where Kentucky meets Tennessee, in cave systems that run for miles underground, there is art on the walls of the deepest chambers, carved and painted figures of people, of animals, of shapes we have no names for. The oldest of it is around 6,500 years old. Older than the pyramids. Older than the first written word anywhere on Earth. It is real, it is documented, and you could not reach most of it without crawling half a mile into the pitch black. This is where we started, and this is where it ends. They didn't make this art where people lived or gathered or could ever see it. They made it in the dark zone, the part of the cave past all light, where nothing grows and no one stays. They went in by torchlight, through passages that squeeze down to nothing, carrying fire into a place every instinct in the body is begging them to leave. And there, in the black, they stopped, and they made something carefully, patiently, beautifully, that they had every reason to believe no living eye would ever find. Archaeologists have tried to explain it, some kind of initiation, some kind of ritual, speaking to a world that lay beneath this one. Every theory has had to be softened or quietly walked back, because the truth is the marks don't answer to us. We can stand exactly where they stood. We can put a light on the thing they made. We cannot get inside the head of the person who decided that the single most important place to leave their mark was the one place on Earth guaranteed to hide it forever. So I'll leave you with the question I haven't been able to put down. What does a person have to believe is waiting in the dark, to carry fire to the very bottom of the earth alone and leave a message down there for it? Not for us. Never for us. For whatever they were certain was down there in the black, listening. They made something beautiful in the one place built to keep it hidden. And 6,500 years later, we crawled in after them and found it anyway. And the only thing we know for certain is that it was never made for our eyes. So tell me two things. Of everything we went down into tonight, which one cracked you open the worst? And which ancient underground place in your state did we miss? Put it in the comments. Somebody watching this right now knows one that nobody else does, and that's exactly how the next one of these gets made. Half a mile underground, in a cave so black your own hand disappears, there is a drawing on the wall. Someone made it by hand, by torchlight, 6,500 years ago, and then climbed back up into the light and left it down there, in the dark. Number 13. The Kent Cliffs Chamber, Putnam County, New York. A low doorway in a hillside, slabs of granite laid without a drop of mortar, corbelled inward until they meet overhead like a stone throat. You have to stoop to enter. Inside, it is cold in a way the season can't explain. The entrance faces one point on the horizon, the winter solstice sunrise. On the shortest day of the year, the light reaches all the way to the back wall. The official story is root cellar, a place to keep potatoes, but a root cellar sits by the house. This one sits alone in the woods, oriented to the sky, dragged from stone that weighs tons. And here is the detail that eats at the root cellar story from the inside. These chambers were built with no door, no frame, no hinges, no way to seal them against the frost. The doors and the mortar you sometimes find were added later by people who came along afterward and simply used what was already standing. A cellar you cannot close keeps nothing cold. Whatever this was built for, it was never meant to be shut. Researchers who measured it found the alignment too precise for an accident. Historians who never measured it called them cranks. And in 2001, the man who had been chief archaeologist for the New York State Museum said the quiet part out loud. The chambers, he admitted, had never been seriously studied. Nobody had produced any evidence at all. Not evidence against, just nobody looking. Locals who grew up nearby say their cameras die at the threshold. It is said one visitor's phone quit the instant she crossed under the stone, then came back to life the moment she stepped out the far side. Maybe nerves, maybe cold on a lens, maybe the reason no one wants to spend the night inside. Number 12, the Putnam Valley Chambers, near Oscawana Lake. Not one chamber, dozens. A whole hillside of them, some paired, twin doorways in the earth a few feet apart. One double chamber here is so rare that a county legislator once tried to pass a law just to protect it. He failed. His colleagues didn't believe it mattered. The people who study these call the density impossible for colonial farmers. Why would settlers, carving a homestead out of raw forest, spend seasons hauling megalithic stone to build cellars they'd never need, aligned to a sky they didn't worship? In 1654, a man named John Pynchon wrote a letter mentioning a stone wall and a strong chamber, all made of stone, newly discovered near the Pequot country. Already old, already unexplained, before most of the colonists even arrived. There is a beat here worth sitting with. No artifacts. In all these chambers, almost nothing has ever been found inside. No pottery, no bones, no tools. Swept clean or never lived in at all. A building with no trace of the builder is not a home. And then there is the one thing that was supposedly found, the thing that makes this worse instead of better. The story goes that in the 90s, an 8-inch blade of obsidian was pulled from the wall of one of these chambers. It was said to be lab tested at roughly 2,000 years old. Obsidian, volcanic glass. There is no obsidian in this part of New York. The obsidian, the account claims, traced back to Iceland. An Icelandic blade, 2,000 years old, in the wall of a chamber outside New York City. It should have rewritten everything. Instead, they say, it was sent off for further testing, and it vanished. Gone before anyone could confirm it. The one piece of hard evidence lost in transit, exactly when it mattered most. Believe as much of that as you like, but it fits the pattern too neatly. These chambers give up their secrets right up until the moment the secret could be proven. Then the door closes. Number 11. Balanced Rock, North Salem. A single boulder of pink granite, 60 tons by the marker, closer to 90 by other counts. It does not sit on the ground. It rests on 5 slender legs of limestone, standing on their points like fingertips, holding the weight above the earth. Geologists have a word for it: erratic. A rock dropped by a melting glacier 10,000 years ago that happened, by pure chance, to land balanced on smaller stones, happened to land on 5 uprights of a different rock than itself, arranged like the legs of a table. Back in 1824, a professor of mineralogy looked at it and wrote that it was no accident at all. He called it a dolmen, a Celtic burial monument, a tomb raised by hands. 2 centuries later, the argument has never ended. The geologists say ice. The others say the proportions are wrong for ice, that no stone nearby matches the legs, that chance does not build furniture. Passionate arguments, both sides, no resolution. just a 90-ton stone standing on its toes in a field by the road, waiting for someone to admit they don't actually know. There was a twin to this once, across the river near Nyack, another great balanced stone on a high hill. But in the 1960s, someone grew afraid it might tip, roll down, and crush the cars below. So they jackhammered it out of existence. One of these stones, destroyed on purpose because no one could say for certain what it was or how long it had stood. The other survives only because it happens to sit in a field where it threatens nothing. That is how thin the thread is. The evidence lasts exactly as long as it stays out of the way. People who visit the North Salem stone at the solstice claim their compasses won't agree near it. Two needles side by side, pointing different ways. Number 10, Chimney Point, the narrows of Lake Champlain. Where the lake pinches thin enough to cross, there is a spit of land that has pulled people to it for 9,000 years. 9,000. Longer than the pyramids, longer than writing. Dig here and the spear points come up in layers, one age beneath another, all the way down. The oldest are fragments so early archaeologists could barely name them. Below the bow, below the wheel, before the memory of anyone who came after. This is the honest anchor of the whole list. Not folklore, documented, dated, undeniable. People stood on this exact ground when the ice had only just let go of these mountains. And that raises the question that haunts everything north of here. For 100 years, the maps left the interior of these mountains blank. Writers called it a dismal wilderness, a place no one had ever lived, the habitation of winter. One old map simply labeled the whole heart of the range, deer hunting country, as if nothing else had ever happened there. They were wrong. The ground proves they were wrong, and the proof travels farther than anyone expected. At sites along this corridor, they have found stone that does not belong here at all. Tall stone traced hundreds of miles to its source. Rock carried across enormous distance, hand to hand, long before roads, long before the wheel. These were not isolated people huddled in a frozen corner of the world. They were connected, moving, trading across a continent. On ground, the history books swore was empty. So what else did they decide was nothing, simply because they never walked in to check? Number 9. Split Rock, Essex, on the Champlain shore. A shelf of stone breaks off the shoreline here, and in the right light, the formations look like something that was alive, coiled, scaled, petrified mid-motion. The old people of this water had a name for what the stone remembers. The Abenaki called it Gitaskog, a horned serpent, a thing that lived in the deep and was not to be disturbed. Early in the 1700s, the Abenaki warned French explorers plainly, "Do not trouble the water. Do not wake what sleeps beneath it." The French wrote it down and sailed on. It is said the serpent still keeps to the narrows near here, where the lake goes dark and cold and drops away beneath the boats. And it does drop. Off this shore, the bottom falls out fast, down into some of the deepest, blackest water in the whole lake. There is a reason the horned serpent belongs to this exact stretch and not another. The people who lived here for 10,000 years chose this place for the story. They knew the water. They knew what the shape in the rock was pointing at. The rock that looks like a snake. The tradition older than the state. The warning that came with the territory. You can stand on Split Rock today and see the shapes for yourself. Whether they are stone or something stone was pressed around long ago, the old-timers would only tell you this: the lake keeps its own counsel, and it does not give things back. Number 8. The Duchess Quarry Caves, Orange County, a cave mouth in a limestone ridge. Inside, in the cold dark, they found a spear point of a kind used to hunt the great animals that are gone now, and beside it, bone. caribou bone, radiocarbon dated to more than 12,000 years ago. Caribou, this far south in New York. The point and the bone together mean a hunter stood in this cave at the edge of the Ice Age, in a world of tundra and animals that no longer exist, when the glaciers were still grinding north not far away. That much is documented. That much is real. What isn't settled is everything else. Who they were, where they came from, how they reached a cave in the dark of a ridge that, by every older textbook, should have been buried under ice or empty of people entirely. The dispute over what this cave means has run for decades and never closed. Some of the dates put people here so early they brush against the very edge of when the ice is supposed to have released this land at all. Push a little harder and you cross into a timeline the textbooks are not ready to allow. That is why the argument never ends. It is not really about the bone. It is about what the bone would force everyone to admit. A hunter, a lost animal, a frozen world, 12,000 years down in the rock. And the experts still fight about the one date that would change everything. Number 7. The Cumberland Bay Pot, Lake Champlain. From the bottom of the bay, they pulled up a clay pot. Whole, unbroken. That alone is wrong. Ancient pottery almost never survives intact. Time crushes it. The ground breaks it. What archaeologists usually find are shards. 100 pieces of a thing to be puzzled back together over years. This one came up complete. Pre-contact, made and shaped and fired long before any European saw this water, and then somehow lowered into the lake and left, perfect, for centuries. A pot doesn't sink itself gently to the floor of a bay and wait to be found unharmed. Someone put it there. Filled, maybe. Sealed, maybe. An offering to the water in a place where the people already spoke of a serpent in the deep. Or dropped in panic. We don't know. The record is thin and the shore is quiet about it. Think about what it takes for a clay pot to survive whole for 2,000 years. It has to avoid every rock, every current, every winter of ice grinding the shallows, every net and anchor and careless oar. The odds against it are almost past counting, and yet it waited on the floor of the bay, intact, as if something had set it down carefully and meant for it to stay. In a lake whose oldest stories are full of a serpent and a warning not to disturb the water, a perfect vessel resting on the bottom starts to look less like an accident and more like an offering, recovered, catalogued, and never fully explained. One more thing pulled out of Champlain that the record has no comfortable place to put. Number 6. Calendar Chamber, the Woodstock Line. East of the Champlain Valley, where these hills roll into stone chamber country, sits the largest of them all. The roof slabs are the biggest in the whole northeast, 15 feet across, over a foot thick, several tons each, laid overhead by someone. They named it for what it does. On the winter solstice, the rising sun aims straight through the doorway and fills the chamber with light. A calendar built of stone, a machine for catching one exact moment in the turning of the year. Its inner dimensions, some have pointed out, echo the same proportions found in far older chambers across the ocean. Passage tombs in Ireland that do the very same thing on the very same morning, 5,000 years ago. When the solstice sun reaches down the passage at Newgrange in Ireland, it lights a chamber built before the pyramids. And here, in the hills west of Champlain, another doorway waits for the same sun on the same day. Some have gone further and measured the inner room against the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid and found the same ratio, staring back. Whether that means anything or nothing, no one has been allowed to properly test. Coincidence, say the careful voices. Root cellar again. But a root cellar does not aim itself at the sun. And this is where the real question of the whole list opens all the way up. If one chamber is aligned by chance, fine. But there are dozens, across 3 states, all quiet, all cold, all facing the same light on the same shortest day. A whole network pointed at the sky by people the history books insist were never here. Number 5. The perched boulders, ridgelines of the highlands. All through these hills, if you climb high enough, you find them. Great stones balanced on smaller ones, set on high ground, facing out. Tripod rocks, some call them. A boulder resting on 3 uprights, like the balanced rock but repeated again and again along the tops of the ridges. Many of them, it's said, line up with the summer solstice, the longest day marked by a stone a dozen men couldn't lift. Glacial erratics, comes the answer. Ice did it, chance did it. Maybe. But here is the part that gets me. One of these balanced stones was surveyed, documented, its solstice alignment written down. And 1 year after the survey was finished, the land was sold and the boulder was moved with heavy machinery. Gone. Erased. Whatever it was, whatever it might have proven, no one can measure it now. And that is the quiet horror running under all of this. The sites vanish faster than anyone studies them. The evidence disappears while the experts look away. Old-timers on these ridges tell it simply. The stones were here before us, and we are very good at losing them. Number 4. The rock shelters of the interior. Cedar River, the Shroon country. Deep in the mountains, tucked under overhangs of rock, there are shelters where people sheltered for thousands of years. The old accounts describe finding pots left behind in them, tucked into a cleft, the way you might leave a coffee pot at a camp for whoever comes next week. One came out of a shelter on the Cedar River whole and ancient, and then, the account says, it was broken, smashed by lumberjacks who found it a curiosity. That is how most of this history has ended, not studied, not preserved, broken by whoever stumbled in first. An old article from the 1940s describes ground slate knives and buried arrows found beside deserted fireplaces on a trail that ran up from the Hudson, through the passes, to Champlain. A road through the mountains, used for so long the fires had gone cold centuries before anyone wrote it down. The people who left these things are gone. The things themselves are mostly gone too, carried off, broken up, lost. And this is the quiet tragedy that experts who did care have admitted out loud. Precious knowledge of what happened in these mountains is being lost forever, dug out and scattered by hobbyists and treasure hunters before a single professional ever records it. The history isn't being studied, it's being looted. Pot by pot, fireplace by fireplace, the answer disappears. What's left is the shape of a presence. Fireplaces with no one around them, shelters with the warmth long out of them, a trail worn through the high passes for so many centuries that the fires beside it had gone cold before anyone thought to write the trail down. And the sense, when you stand inside one, that you are very much not the first, and that the ones before you left in a hurry. Number 3. Bulwaga Bay, Port Henry, on the Adirondack coast. The lake here is deep and it is old, and it has a resident. The people who lived on these shores first, the Abenaki and the Iroquois, told of a great horned serpent in the water long before any European wrote a word. It has a name in their tongue. It was not a story for children, it was a warning. Then, in July of 1819, a newspaper in Plattsburgh printed an account. A Captain Crum on the water at Bulwaga Bay described a black monster near 200 feet long, a head like a seahorse, eyes the color of a peeled onion, a belt of red around its neck reared up out of the lake. Since then, the sightings number in the hundreds. railroad crews, steamboat passengers, a county sheriff who swore he was close enough to see inside its mouth. The scientists have their answers. A sturgeon, a floating log, a trick of cold air bending light across the water into something long and alive. Probably, almost certainly, except for one recording. In 2003, a research team lowered instruments into the lake and captured sounds down in the dark water. The sounds resembled echolocation, the clicking sonar of a beluga whale or a dolphin. And there are no belugas in Lake Champlain. There are no dolphins. Nothing that lives in that lake is supposed to be able to make that sound at all. Something down there was pinging the dark, and no one can say what it was. Bulwaga Bay is where the modern sightings began, and the town on its shore still keeps a board that counts them. And the old people said it first, and said it plainly. Something is in the lake. Do not wake it. Number 2, the Champlain Valley Graves, along the old shore. This is the one the history books do not want printed, so we print it the way it comes down to us, as report, as claim, as something the old newspapers swore was true. Through the 1800s, accounts came out of this valley of skeletons dug from the ground that were wrong. Too large. Abnormal, the report said. Bones of people who, if the measurements were honest, would have stood far taller than any man. The stories cluster along the same shore where the ancient spear points come up. The same crossings, the same old ground. Now. Newspapers of that age exaggerated. Bones get misjudged, mismeasured, lost before any expert sees them. Almost every one of these accounts has a plain explanation, and the extraordinary ones have no bones left to test. That is the honest truth of it, and we say it plainly. But here is what makes the back of the neck cold. The reports were never really investigated either. They went the way of the chambers and the perched stones and the broken pots. Written down once in a local paper, then dropped, then quiet. It is the same shape every time on this list. A thing is found, a thing is reported. And then the people whose job it is to know decide it is better not to look. Suppressed history believers have a word for that vein of silence. They call it a pattern. The careful call it coincidence. You have 13 coincidences in front of you now. You can decide how many a place is allowed before it stops being chance. Whatever came out of that ground, it was reburied in silence, and the valley, as always, kept it. Number 1, the 350, inside the blue line. Here is the site that contains all the others. In 1985, a survey of the land inside these mountains logged more than 350 prehistoric sites, ancient places, documented, catalogued, real. Of those 350, only a handful have ever been dug by a professional. A handful. The rest sit exactly as they were, untouched, unopened, unexplained. Ask why, and you get the answer that started this whole thing. The chief archaeologist of the State Museum said the structures here were never seriously studied because nobody had ever produced evidence of anything but colonial origin. Read that again. Never studied because no evidence was produced. And no evidence was produced because nobody studied them. That is not science. That is a door held shut. 350 sites. Stone chambers aimed at the solstice. Boulders standing on their fingertips. Caves with Ice Age hunters in them. A lake with a serpent in its oldest stories. A whole buried history that the experts decided, without looking, was nothing. They didn't explain these places. They refused to. And they are still out there tonight, in the cold under the pines. 350 of them. Quiet, aligned, waiting for the one morning a year the light comes in, before you go. Number 1 was the 350 sites nobody will dig. That's the one that stays with me. Not because of what's in them, because of how hard the people who should know have worked to not find out. The one that unsettles me most, though, is the chamber we opened with. A stone tunnel in the woods, built by no one anyone will name, aimed at a single sunrise. Somebody stood where that light lands and thought it was worth moving mountains for. Here is the grounding fact to take with you. These are not distant ruins across an ocean. They are in New York. You can drive to most of them. You can stoop and walk inside. So tell me two things down below. Which of these 13 would you actually spend the night at? And which one did we miss? Because you know these hills better than any map. And the next site on the list is probably in your own backyard. Number 15, Picture Cave, eastern edge of the Ozarks, Missouri. Picture Cave sits at the eastern shoulder of the Ozark Uplift in Missouri, and it holds one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric painted art anywhere in North America. Hundreds of images, human figures, animals, and things that are neither figures with the bodies of men and the heads of hawks, warriors holding severed heads, are being researchers connect to the Mississippian hero known as Birdman or Morning Star. Here is the documented strange part. When specialists first examined the quality of the portraiture, the faces, the detail in them, they genuinely questioned whether it could be ancient at all. It looked too good. It took chemical dating of the pigments to settle it, and the answer came back around 1,000 years old, roughly AD 1000. Now the part nobody up there likes to talk about. In the 19th century, this place had another name. They called it the Bottomless Cave, because there was a pit at the back, and it said that when you dropped a stone down that shaft, no sound ever came back up. No splash, no clatter, nothing. Old-timers took that silence to mean the pit had no floor. The real answer, when it finally came, was almost worse in its own quiet way. Thousands of years of bat guano packed down that shaft, deep enough to swallow the sound of a falling rock hole. And in 2021, the cave and the land around it were sold at auction for over $2 million, sold over the objection of the Osage Nation, who consider it sacred. The faces have a price now. Nobody can explain why that sits so wrong. Number 14. The Narrows, Boston Mountains, Arkansas. Go west and up into the Boston Mountains, the highest, roughest part of the Arkansas Ozarks, and you'll find a bluff shelter that locals have known about for generations. It's called the Narrows, and on its walls is the largest gathering of people in any rock art site in the entire state. 28 human figures, spread across 5 separate panels. Archaeologists call them anthropomorphs, and they don't know if you're looking at a story, a ceremony, or a dance frozen mid-step. One figure wears what reads as a feathered headdress. Another holds an object interpreted as a mace, and a mace, in the late prehistoric world, was not a weapon. It was a symbol of chiefly power. Somebody important is standing on that wall. For the honesty of it, this is one of the sites where the dating actually got pinned down, and it's a good example of how they do it. They didn't date the paint. They dated the hickory nutshells left on the shelter floor and the pottery styles, and both pointed to the middle of the 1400s and possibly to a connection with Spiro, the great ceremonial center off to the west. But here's what the radiocarbon can't tell you. 28 figures, and one of them leading. It said the procession is walking somewhere. Nobody can say where. The wall only shows you that they're going. Number 13, Washington State Park Petroglyphs, Missouri. Not everything down here is painted. Some of it is cut. At the eastern edge of the Missouri Ozarks, above a sharp bend in the Big River, There is a shelf of hard dolomite rock carved with hundreds of symbols: birds, arrows, footprints, human figures, turkey tracks, geometric shapes nobody has decoded. It is the largest group of petroglyphs yet found in Missouri, and the best current estimate puts the carving between 1,000 and 1,600 years into the past. The people who made them are tied to the Middle Mississippians, the same broad culture that raised Cahokia, the great mound city just across the river. This spot was a ceremonial ground. People came here on purpose, to this exact bend in the river, to cut these marks into stone. And here's the detail that stays with you. When the park was built in the 1930s, part of the site, a stretch of terraces and benches where people had lived and worked, was graded flat by the construction crews, bulldozed. Whatever record was in that ground is simply gone now. We dug up a road and paved over the rest. It's said the carvings that remain are only a fraction of what was once cut into that riverbank. Number 12. Number 12. Breckenridge Rock Shelter, Carroll County, Arkansas. This one is just a number, but it's the number this whole video is built around. In a rock shelter in Carroll County, Arkansas, archaeologists recovered a stone spear point, and near it, a piece of charred wood, the remains of some ancient fire. When that charcoal was radiocarbon dated, it came back at 8,720 years, give or take 30. That makes it the oldest radiocarbon date tied to an artifact anywhere in Arkansas. Sit with that. Nearly 11,000 years ago, someone sat in that hollow, built a fire, and left a spear point behind. The Ozarks were already old to them. The mountains you're looking at are among the oldest exposed rock on the continent, and human beings have been sheltering in their folds for 100 centuries. And this is exactly where the science broke historically. For decades, people had no way to date any of this. They guessed by how deep an object was buried, and depth lies. So the early researchers took 11,000 years of different peoples and different eras, and they mashed it all into one imaginary tribe, one story. Radiocarbon dating didn't even reach these shelters until the 1960s. Everything before that was a guess, and the guesses were always too young. Number 11. Number 11. Lon Odell Memorial Cave near Springfield, Missouri. In April of 1985, a farmer's field near Springfield, Missouri collapsed. A sinkhole opened where solid ground had been, and cavers went down to survey what it had exposed. What they found is one of the strangest sealed rooms in the Ozarks, because the cave they dropped into had only one entrance, the sinkhole that had just opened that day in that field. There was no other way in. There never had been. And yet, deep inside, on the cave floor, were unshod human footprints, bare feet, alongside them cougar tracks, bear beds where the animals had slept, and the burned out ends of torches. Every bit of it had to be prehistoric. The only door had been shut for who knows how many thousands of years, until a field caved in and let the daylight ask its questions. People walked in that cave barefoot, carrying fire, in the deep dark, beside sleeping bears, and then the way out closed behind them and stayed closed until 1985. On the wall, a rock art specialist later identified a carved figure she read as an underwater spirit, the being some tribes call the underwater panther, a creature of the world below. It said that's not an unusual thing to find in a wet cave. Old belief held that certain caves were doorways, and you did not carve a doorway guardian for no reason. Number 10. Number 10. Plum Bayou Mounds, Arkansas. Everything so far has been carved or painted into the land. This one was built on top of it. At the southern edge of the Ozark country in Arkansas stands a site once mistakenly called Toltec Mounds, named by a 19th century landowner who was certain the Toltecs of Mexico had built it, because she could not believe the ancestors of local native people had. She was wrong, and the Smithsonian proved her wrong in the 1880s. But the real story is stranger than her guess. The mounds were raised by a people archaeologists call Plum Bayou, one basket of earth at a time, starting around AD 650. The tallest still stands 49 feet high, and they were not thrown up at random. The mounds are positioned to line up with the sunrise on the solstice and the equinox. Somebody was tracking the sky and writing it into the ground in earth and shadow. Then, around the year 1050, the Plum Bayou people walked away. They abandoned the whole complex, and archaeologists can find no reason for it. No war layer, no burn, no sign of disaster. They simply left. And here is the part that fits this list exactly. The Plum Bayou culture cannot be matched to any tribe living in the region when Europeans arrived. They don't connect cleanly to anyone still here. They built a calendar out of hills. They kept it for 400 years, and then they vanished from the record without a forwarding address. We don't know their name. We only know the shadows their mounds still throw at sunrise. Number 9. Number 9. Graham Cave, Missouri. Graham Cave sits on the northern rim of the Ozarks in Missouri, and it is one of the sites that broke the whole timeline open. For a long time, the accepted story of North America said people simply hadn't been here very long. Then places like Graham Cave were excavated, and the tools and the layers went down and down into the Paleo-Indian and archaic past. Thousands upon thousands of years of continuous human use. So significant the site was named a National Historic Landmark. People sheltered in that sandstone mouth when mastodons still walked nearby. The strange thing here isn't a legend. It's the sheer weight of time pressing up out of the floor. Every layer they dug through was somebody's whole world. And the deeper they went, the older it got. And the older it got, the more it undercut everything textbooks had said about when people first came into this country. It said the Ozarks were a refuge, that when the world outside changed, people came into these hollows and these caves and waited it out, generation after generation. The dirt in Graham Cave agrees. It just can't tell us who they all were. Number 8. Number 8. The White River Mortuary Bluffs, Arkansas. Along the White River and its tributaries, in the Arkansas Ozarks, certain large bluffs were set aside for the dead. Not every shelter, specific ones. Archaeologists have found that in the later prehistoric period, particular bluffs overlooking the White River were used as mortuary houses, places built for the dead rather than the living. And the people laid to rest in them were not ordinary. They were buried with beads and ornaments made of marine shell that had to travel hundreds of miles inland from the Gulf Coast to reach these hills. Think about what that means. 1,000 years ago and more, something moved shell from the ocean, up through the whole interior of the continent, into specific high bluffs above one Ozark River to be buried with specific people. There was a network. There was rank. There was a reason certain souls went into certain bluffs with treasures from a sea they may never have seen. And it said the local people always knew which bluffs those were and left them alone. That some overhangs you simply did not shelter in, did not camp under, because of who was already resting there. The archaeology now confirms what the avoidance always encoded. These were houses of the dead, and the living knew the addresses. Number 7. Number 7. Brown Bluff and the Dry Shelters, Boston Mountains, Arkansas. The Ozarks keep things they shouldn't be able to keep. Most of what ancient people made was soft: baskets, cloth, cord, wood, feathers. Almost everywhere on Earth, that material rots and vanishes within a few years, and the past goes silent. But the bluff shelters of the Boston Mountains are big and deep, and above all dry. And in that dryness, the soft things survived. Out of shelters like Brown Bluff came woven baskets, textiles, cordage, netting, and the oldest known example of a Native American flute, found right here in northwest Arkansas. Instruments, music, the actual objects of daily and ceremonial life that almost never outlast the people who made them, preserved in the dark for 1,000 years and more. That preservation is a gift and a problem at once, because it's why the early researchers got so confused. They pulled ancient hunting gear and later farming tools out of the same dry shelter floor and assumed one people used all of it at once. A people frozen in time, primitive, unchanging. That was the myth. The dryness that saved the artifacts also scrambled the story. And it's said there are shelters back in those mountains that were never dug at all, still sealed with their soft treasures intact in the dark. What a dry Ozark hollow can keep, it keeps for a very long time. Number 6. Rock House Cave, Petit Jean, Arkansas. On top of Petit Jean Mountain at the southern edge of the range, there's a bluff shelter open enough to walk into called Rock House Cave, and its ceiling and walls carry dozens of red-painted images. Most are abstract, sunbursts, geometry, marks whose meaning is gone. But one is unmistakable, and it's life-sized, a paddlefish, the spoonbill catfish painted across the rock at full scale, which archaeologists read as a sign of how important that fish was as food to the people who lived here. A portrait of the thing that kept them alive. The mountain itself carries a name legend, the way these places do. It said Petit Jean was a young Frenchwoman who disguised herself as a boy to follow the man she loved across the ocean to this wilderness, fell sick on the mountain, and was buried at its edge, and that her grave is still up there. The story is soft. The pictographs are not. Whoever painted a full-size paddlefish on that stone ceiling was telling you exactly what mattered on this mountain in a language we can still half read. Number 5. Onondaga Cave, Missouri. Deep in the Missouri Ozarks is one of the great show caves of the state, Onondaga, a cathedral of stone, towering formations, a national natural landmark. But its name is the Tell. Onondaga comes from an Iroquois word, and it means people of the mountain. And the Osage Nation recognizes this cave as one of many sacred sites across Missouri. Long before it was a tour, it was holy ground. The documented strangeness of the Ozarks is that it is honeycombed. Missouri is called the Cave State for a reason. Thousands of caves and sinkholes and springs threading under the hills. And to the people who lived here, those openings were not scenery. They were thresholds, the line between the world above and the world below. It said there are caves in these hills you were never meant to enter, not because of the drop or the dark, but because of what the old belief held was on the other side. People carved underwater spirits at cave mouths. They left offerings at springs. They knew which openings were doorways. We put electric lights and handrails in some of them and called them attractions. The name on this one still quietly insists it belongs to the people of the mountain. Number 4, the hollows nobody has read, across the range. This one isn't a single site. It's a number, and it's the most unsettling number on the list. More than 2,000. That is how many occupied ancient sites archaeologists have already identified in the Ozark bluffs and caves. More than 2,000 places where people painted, carved, sheltered, worked, and buried their dead. And the honest truth from the researchers themselves is that most of them have never been fully studied. Radiocarbon dating only reached these shelters in the 1960s, and they'll tell you plainly there is still a long way to go to work out even the basic chronology. So when this video says scientists still can't explain these places, that isn't a trick of phrasing. It's the literal state of the record. There is a rich concentration of ancient rock art here, one of the densest in all of eastern North America, sitting in 2,000 hollows, most of them unread, in a range where every date that has been checked came back older than expected. And it's said, in these hills, that people still stumble onto them. A new sinkhole opens, like the one near Springfield. A hunter ducks under an overhang out of the rain and looks up at a painted wall no archaeologist has ever recorded. The Ozarks are not done showing us what they're hiding. Most of the story is still in the dark, waiting on a flashlight. Number 3. The hieroglyphics that never were. Now for the one everybody wants to believe. And I'm going to tell you the truth about it, because the truth is stranger than the hoax. For more than a century, people looked at the marks on these bluff walls and insisted they were writing. Hieroglyphics, they called it. Picture writing. And a whole cottage industry grew up claiming the real authors were ancient visitors from across the ocean, that there were Norse runes up there, or Phoenician letters, or Greek, or Ogham script from the old Celtic world, hidden in the Ozark rock. Proof, they said, that someone from the old world got here first and left a message. Here's the documented reality. There is no evidence, none, of Ogham, or runes, or Greek, or Phoenician on any bluff wall in the Ozarks. It isn't writing at all. No written language existed in North America before European contact, so the people who made these marks could not have been writing in the way we mean it. But, and this is the part the debunkers skip, that does not make the marks empty. The images are symbolic. They carry meaning. A figure with a raised staff, a being with a hawk's head, a procession of 28 people. Those aren't letters, but they are absolutely saying something. It's a language of image and story, and we've lost the key to most of it. The mystery was never secret Vikings. The mystery is that a real, deep symbolic system is staring back at us off these walls, and we can only read a fraction of it. The truth was sitting under the hoax the whole time. Number 2, Eden's Bluff and the Bag of Seeds, Arkansas. Back to the White River, to a shelter called Eden's Bluff in Benton County, Arkansas, first dug in the 1930s because of one small thing that was found there, a bag of seeds. Among everything else the dry bluff preserved, excavators found seeds, and finds like these from Ozark shelters turned out to matter far beyond their size. Because when researchers looked closely at the plants, the ancient people of these hollows were carrying and growing, they found domesticated crops, not just gathered wild food, plants these people had bred over generations, changed with their own hands. Chenopodium, marsh elder, a lost garden. This is one of the quiet bombshells of Ozark archaeology. The old story said the people up in these mountains were backward, isolated hillbillies of the ancient world, lagging behind everyone else. The seeds said the opposite. These were farmers, plant breeders, people running one of the early independent agricultural experiments in all of North America, right here in the hollows. The bluff dwellers weren't behind. In some ways, they were ahead. and nobody outside these hills knew it. A bag of seeds, kept dry in the dark for 1,000 years, quietly overturned a whole theory about who these people were. And it said the fullest baskets and the best preserved caches are the ones still out there in the shelters no one has opened. Number 1. Number 1, the people with no name. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning and to the thing that ties every one of these 15 sites together. We have their faces, painted 1,000 feet inside Picture Cave. We have their dead, laid in the White River bluffs with shell carried up from the sea. We have their calendar, built 49 feet high at Plum Bayou and aligned to the solstice sun. We have their music, in the oldest flute in the country. We have their farms, in a bag of seeds at Eden's Bluff. We have 11,000 years of their fires, going back to that charred wood at Breckenridge. We have everything except their name. The great myth of the Ozarks was that a single mysterious vanished race once lived in these hollows and disappeared. And the honest documented answer is that this myth is wrong, but it's wrong in a way that's almost eerier than if it were true. Because there was no one vanished people. There were many, culture after culture, for 100 centuries, layered in the same dry shelters, until early researchers with no way to date anything compressed all of them into one imaginary tribe and called it solved. Every time the science sharpened, that single made-up people dissolved into more real ones. Further back, harder to name. That's the direction. That's the thing I told you to watch at the start. Every date on this list moved older. Every answer opened another question. And the painted faces 1,000 feet inside that Missouri hillside, the ones the experts first waved off as a modern fake, are still down there in the dark, still 1,000 years old, still without a name to call the hands that made them. The Ozarks kept everything these people made. Everything, except who they were. So I'll leave the last question with you. Of all 15 of these hollows, the mortuary bluffs, the bottomless cave, the sealed room full of barefoot prints, which one would you not walk into alone? And which Ozark site did we miss? Drop it below. Somebody watching this lives right on top of one we didn't name. And in these hills, the next discovery is usually somebody just looking up at the right